Hi everyone, my name is Kevin, and if you've watched my channel before, you probably already know that. For this video, I thought I would use a slightly different format, but I've gotten a lot of questions from people over time asking me how I got my job at Microsoft. And that's something I wonder about sometimes too. I've been at Microsoft now for almost 14 years. So I've been at the company for quite some time. Hopefully when I say 14 years, you're thinking to yourself, how could that be? This guy looks so young. But I've been at the company for a while, and I've been in many different roles since I joined Microsoft. When I first joined the company, I actually worked in marketing, then I worked in sales, I worked in operations, and finally I've ended up on the engineering team working as a program manager. So I've been in many different roles since I joined the company. And when I think to, well, what was the most pivotal reason that I ended up at Microsoft, or how did I really end up at this company? I think back to even farther than 14 years ago, but this probably goes back 20 something years ago when I was in high school. So middle school on to high school. One thing I was really interested in is the web. And keep in mind, at the time, that was when the web was really growing. A lot more people were getting online. AOL was the main internet provider at the time. And so it was really an interesting space. And one of the things I was fascinated by is websites and how people create websites and put pages online. Now, this was a way that people expressed themselves back in the day. So at the time, you didn't have Facebook, you didn't have YouTube, you didn't have Twitter. And so what a lot of people did is they would set up their own website. So maybe they had a cat website, maybe it was some other type of content, but they wanted some type of place to express themselves. And what I did is I set up my own web hosting company. And with a web hosting company, people could sign up with me. They could create their own website and then they could show it to the world. So very similar to what someone like, say, GoDaddy or 1&1 does today. And so I created my own web hosting company. And the really interesting thing was, at the time, I was just a teenager. So I was just a teenage boy growing up in New Jersey. And all of a sudden, people started sending me checks in the mail and, to host their website. And so I got all these, little did they know that I was a teenager. If they had known, they probably wouldn't have sent me a check in the mail. But I got all these checks and my business started growing. I started with, 2 customers, then 5, then 10, then 20, then 40. And it kept growing. And at its peak, I had hundreds and hundreds of customers. So I had about 120 of my own customers. And then I even had people reselling on my behalf where they had their own hosting company and they were using my systems to be able to host their content. And so the business really grew more and more. Now, what was interesting is to help my business grow, I got to do all sorts of things. Like I managed the technical aspect. I bought my own server. I hosted the accounts on my own server. I also got to do marketing. I put ads in the New York Times and different alumni magazines to attract more customers to my business. And really the fantastic thing about eMegaWeb is it really just exposed me to all these different aspects of business, both the business side and also the technical side. Now, a funny thing is, so my business was called eMegaWeb. And before you laugh too hard, at the time it was actually trendy to have a business name with an E in front. You had things like eToys and others where they had an E in front. And so I simply threw an E in front, and then it was a cool sounding name. And in fact, you could still see the website. It's still out there by going to emegaweb.net or emegaweb.com. And before you laugh too hard at looking at the website, just keep in mind, this is about 20 years ago that I created this website. And at the time, it was a very modern and advanced website. But yes, age does have a way, or time does have a way of really showing the age of something. And the website, sure, it does look a little older now. And the website actually still exists. I no longer run eMegaWeb, but I had a friend of mine who was still running a hosting company, and he took over the business from me. One of the things that I did is when I was deciding where to go to college, I ended up going to the University of Michigan. And at Michigan, I got to choose what courses I wanted to take. And from my eMegaWeb experience, I knew I really enjoyed running a business. So I really liked the business side of things, but I also enjoyed the technical side of things. Ultimately, I preferred the business side more, so I ended up studying business at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. But at the same time, while studying business, I also continued taking different computer courses. So I took C++, I took database courses. So I wanted to continue kind of building up my technical skills as well. So I had a mix of both business and technical skills. One of the things that was really great about going to the University of Michigan is all these different companies recruited at the University of Michigan. So it really made it easy for me as a student. You had companies like Microsoft, you had Accenture, you had Best Buy, you had finance companies, tech companies, Google, all these other companies came out and interviewed. And what I did is I saw Microsoft was interviewing. And so I said, hey, I should submit my resume to Microsoft. And they were recruiting for both finance and then also marketing at the business school. In our computer science school, they were recruiting for developers and that sort of thing. And I decided, hey, let me submit my resume. And I ended up getting the marketing interview and not the finance interview. So, seemed good with me. And so I prepped for my interview. I watched a whole bunch of different videos and I read different, actually, it was probably more so reading content at the time to prep for interviews. What was really fantastic is eMegaWeb really served as a good story that I could share in the interview. And a lot of times what happens is in interviews, and I've conducted a lot of interviews now myself at Microsoft, but one of the things that's typically asked is they have these behavioral interview questions. So they look at how have you behaved in the past, and is that an indicator of how you'll behave in the future? And so eMegaWeb was my primary story that I shared in my interview. And it really demonstrates a lot of things. I had initiative to start a business. I had drive to, maintain a business, to interact with customers, to make strategic decisions of where I should invest in my business. And so the story really helped me out quite a bit. And they invited me back out to do another interview on campus. Now, I went through and I interviewed with two different teams when I came out to Redmond, Washington, and those interviews went well. And so I had my choice of two different teams. One of them was actually working on OneNote, and OneNote at the time was a relatively new product, and so I could have worked on the marketing for that. The other option was working on something called Unified Collaboration. It was a product that Microsoft had acquired called Live Meeting. It eventually turned into Link, and then eventually Skype for Business, and now eventually Teams. So it's gone through quite a bit an evolution. And I decided to join the company on this incubation team. I thought it would be fun to work on something that was newer and really growing within the company. And when I ended up joining the company full time, it became the Exchange group. And so I was part of that. So Link and Exchange were together. With an internship at Microsoft, it was a really, really neat experience. So with an internship, you have all these other people who are, either between their junior and senior year in college, and they're all interning. And so you have a lot of developer interns, you have marketing interns, you have finance interns, and Microsoft really does a good job building their internship program. So they have all these events planned throughout the summer for the interns. They have lots of free food, lots of free t-shirts. Of course, they all have the big Microsoft logo on it. I don't tend to wear stuff like that anymore, but it was a really awesome program. And the highlight of my internship at Microsoft was they invited all of the interns out to Bill Gates' house on Lake Washington, right outside of Redmond, Washington. And so I got to go have basically dinner at Bill Gates' house. And keep in mind, it wasn't just me. There were a lot of other interns at this event. There were probably about 40 or 50 interns there. But it was really neat. They brought all these different VPs from across Microsoft, all these general managers from across Microsoft, and you got to interact with all of them. So really just a cool experience that Microsoft is trying to get these people to come back by really bringing their top guns along. The funny thing is when Bill Gates finally strolled down, he wasn't there right at the start. He probably came down about 20 minutes in. All the interns just flocked over to Bill. And then you have all these other really high-ranking people within the company who ordinarily, when you see someone like that, you'd say, hey, I want to talk to them. I mean, they're high up. They have thousands of people under them within the company. But as soon as Bill appeared, everyone just flocked over. And there were all sorts of questions that Bill responded to. Some people asked, hey, what was the last code you wrote? Or what are your thoughts on, power consumption of PCs? There are all sorts of just interesting questions that Bill Gates shared his thoughts on. But it was really neat. I got to stand right next to Bill Gates and, listen to him and ask questions. And turned out I was about a head taller than Bill Gates. Growing up, you always see Bill Gates on TV or in magazines, and you expect this larger than life figure. And then here I was standing right next to him, and turned out I was taller than him. So it was kind of a just very, very cool experience. Not only meeting Bill Gates, but it was also very neat to see what his house looked like. I got to go through his house, and it turns out his boathouse is about the same size of my house that I have here in Seattle. Now, with my internship at Microsoft, it turns out that you think you go through the interview, you get an offer for an internship, you think the hard part's done, but the internship is actually like a full-on multiple-month interview. And the team kind of looks at how you work, how you engage with others, and based on how your internship goes, they then either decide to bring you back full-time or not. And not every intern gets to come back full-time. Luckily, my team, I guess, liked the contribution I made, and they invited me to come back full-time. And so then I went back for my senior year in college, and talk about an awesome year in college, because my whole senior year, I knew I had a job lined up. So it actually turned out it was my best year at school, because I didn't have to really worry about what my job prospects would look like. All of that was already taken care of. Now, when I came back to Microsoft, I returned to the same team that I interned on, and I ended up working on a marketing team on Exchange Server, and I worked in PR. Now, I'm probably not the best person to have in PR, so I stayed on that team for about a year and a half. And the great thing about Microsoft is it's a pretty big company, so I was able to switch to a different team. And I've actually, throughout my career, or my almost 14 years at Microsoft, I've been on several different teams. So after I worked on PR for a little bit, then I moved into a sales role where I helped customers manage their campaigns on Bing. So if they're running a search engine marketing campaign, I helped them manage those campaigns and make sure those campaigns performed well. At the same time, it was sales, so I also wanted to hit a certain quota and increase the amount of money they spent on Bing. Once I wrapped up in Bing, then I moved over into an operations role. And this was really interesting. I worked on the invoicing for all of Microsoft advertising business. So they did about $2 billion a year at the time in advertising revenue, and I got to manage that whole process. So I did all of the invoicing. So one way to think of it is it's like a giant mail merge across tens of thousands of customers to collect that type of revenue. So it was a really interesting role. One of the things that was neat at that point in my career, I also met my wife, and Microsoft has something called the connector bus, and the connector bus is a bus that shuttles you from, say, downtown Seattle or different surrounding areas around Redmond, and it buses people into work. So they offer a free bus service, and it's called the connector, and that's where I met my wife. So I met my wife, or we connected on the connector. And that's how I got to know her. And she was working at the time as a program manager, still works as a program manager. And she said, "Hey, Kevin, you should consider the engineering team and being a program manager. You know, all the types of projects you're telling me about, kind of the skill set that you have, you'd be a perfect program manager." And so I actually switched over to work on Bing as a program manager. And at the time, it was Windows 8.1, and I lit up a whole bunch of the search features that were in Windows. Today, you could search directly from Windows, but at the time, that wasn't possible. And so I was part of the team that brought search to Windows. Then I also worked on some incubation teams from that point onwards as a program manager. I worked on some tools like Find Time, which I've done a video on, which helps you save time scheduling. And then most recently, I've worked as a program manager working on Office.com and also the Office app. And so I was the program manager who got the funding and also led the way on the Office app. And you could, if you use Windows 10, you could see what the Office app experience looks like by simply going to your Start menu and then searching for Office, and you'll have an app pop up. Let me know if you have any feedback on that, or leave comments down below about what you think about that app. But as a little bit about what a program manager does. So the best way to think of a program manager is it's like a business owner. When you first start out, a small business owner. As you've been at the company longer, it's like being a big business owner. But in a sense, you're kind of like the CEO, where you're making decisions on where to invest, what features we should build out, what customers think of the product, how customers are using the product. So looking at the data and understanding the usage behavior. But as a program manager, I get to do all of that. I'm making decisions on what investments we should make. So take the Office app as an example, just what we should highlight in the app, what the features should be, what are the different settings we want to highlight. Should we invest in the jump list? So if you right click on the app tile, do you see a jump list? How are customers using the app? What does engagement look like? What does retention of the app look like? So that's all the type of stuff I get to do on a day-to-day basis as a program manager at Microsoft. So to answer the question, how did I get my job at Microsoft? Well, I originally started out with an internship, and then that turned into a full-time job. And then once I had my full-time job, I've also jumped between different teams within the company, and I've had to re-interview kind of as I've done different jobs within the company. So not only have I gotten one job at Microsoft, but I've gotten several jobs at Microsoft since I've been there. So hopefully that answers the question, how did I get my job at Microsoft? And pretty much everyone at Microsoft has a different story about how they got there. I think the key thing is, if you're looking at a job at Microsoft, you want to make sure that you demonstrate skills that Microsoft wants. And so some of the things I tried to demonstrate, well, by starting my own business, it showed drive, it showed initiative. It was a tech-related business, so I had some tech skills, I had some business skills, and so that presented well. But you don't necessarily have to start a company to get a job at Microsoft. You know, several people who I've interviewed before, they've worked on very kind of inspiring group projects at school, or they had, you know, great teamwork that they've done at school, and those present them very well when you come in for an interview. So everyone's story is different. Everyone will go down a different path, and there are many ways to end up at Microsoft. But hopefully sharing my journey will hopefully give you some ideas, hopefully inspire you. And let me know if you have any comments or questions down below. I read them all. And then the typical way I always close all my videos is, if you want to see more videos like this in the future, hit that subscribe button. That way you'll get notifications anytime content like this comes out. And then also, if you want to see me cover any other topics, you know, this video of how I got my job at Microsoft, this came from people asking me in the comments how I did that. So I thought video was the best way to share how I got my job at Microsoft. But leave comments down below, and I'll make more videos based on what I hear from the different comments that I see. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.